Christmas Eve dinner at our family home in suburban Denver, Colorado. My sister Amanda stands up dramatically, wine glass in hand, announcing to our extended family of 15 people that Dad has decided to leave his entire life savings and inheritance to her alone, cutting me out completely. The room erupts in cheers and applause. Uncle Robert raises his glass. Aunt Martha hugs Amanda tearfully. Cousins nod approvingly. I sit frozen, watching Dad's face drain of color as I lean toward him and ask quietly, "Dad, should I tell them what you actually told me yesterday?" Amanda's celebration stops mid-laugh. "Told you what? Let me back up and explain how we got here." Growing up in this modest three-bedroom house on Maple Street, Amanda and I had what most people would call a normal childhood. Dad worked as an electrical contractor for 30 years, getting up at 5 every morning to wire houses and install lighting systems across the Denver metro area. Mom passed away from cancer when Amanda was 22 and I was 19, leaving Dad to navigate the rest of his life alone. Amanda always seemed to capture Dad's attention in ways I never could. She was the outgoing one, the charmer who could make him laugh after his longest workdays. When she graduated high school, Dad co-signed her student loans for college. When she got married to Bradley at 25, Dad helped with the down payment on their house. When their construction business struggled during the recession, Dad quietly covered several months of their mortgage payments. I took a different path. After Mom died, I worked my way through community college while living at home, studying emergency medical services. I became a paramedic at 21 and moved into a small apartment across town. I never asked Dad for money because I saw how hard he worked for every dollar. His hands were permanently stained from electrical work, his back ached from crawling through attics, but he never complained. He just kept saving, planning for a retirement he hoped would finally give him some peace. Over the years, I noticed Amanda visiting Dad more frequently, especially after her daughter Emma was born. She would bring Emma over for Sunday dinners and stay afterward to help Dad with his paperwork. Amanda had always been good with numbers, so when Dad's arthritis made it difficult for him to manage his small business accounting, it seemed natural for her to take over the bookkeeping. But 2 days before this Christmas dinner, Dad called me with panic in his voice. "Denver, can you come over? I need to show you something, and I don't know what to do." I found him sitting at his kitchen table with bank statements spread out like a crime scene investigation. His hands trembled as he pointed to the papers. "Someone's been taking money from my accounts. Look at these withdrawals." The statements told a disturbing story. Small amounts had been disappearing for 18 months. $500 here, $1,000 there, always just under the limit that would trigger automatic bank alerts. But recently, the amounts had grown bolder. $2,000, $3,000, even $5,000 withdrawals that Dad swore he never made. "I hired someone to look into it," Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A private investigator named Marcus Thompson. He found out who's been doing this." Dad pulled out a manila folder that made my stomach drop. Inside were security camera photographs from ATM locations across the city. Each photo showed the same person making withdrawals from Dad's account using a duplicate debit card. The person in every single photo was Amanda. The investigator had traced nearly $40,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over the past year and a half. The evidence was overwhelming. Amanda had been systematically draining Dad's life savings while pretending to help him manage his finances. "I confronted her 3 weeks ago," Dad continued, his eyes filling with tears. "She denied everything at first. Then she claimed the money was loans I had forgotten about because of my age. When I showed her the photographs, she became furious and told me I was getting senile. She said if I pursued this any further, she would tell everyone I was losing my mind and have me declared incompetent." The cruelty of Amanda's threat hit me like a physical blow. She was using Dad's own fears about aging and dependency as weapons against him. Dad had always been terrified of becoming a burden on his family or losing his independence. Amanda knew this and exploited it perfectly. "But that's not the worst part," Dad said. "She's been telling the whole family that I've been acting confused lately, forgetting things, repeating myself. She's been setting up this narrative for months, making everyone believe I'm developing dementia so they won't believe me if I try to expose her." Dad reached into another envelope and pulled out legal documents. "I met with my lawyer yesterday, Denver. I've been playing along with Amanda's manipulation, pretending to agree to leave her everything in my will. But I'm really cutting her out completely and pressing charges for elder fraud right after Christmas. The police already have the case file. As I absorbed this devastating information, Dad looked at me with desperate hope. That Christmas announcement she's planning tomorrow night? I want you there when she makes it. I want the whole family to hear what she's really been doing to me. Now, sitting at this Christmas dinner table watching Amanda bask in the family's approval of her supposed inheritance, I understood the full scope of her manipulation. She had spent months poisoning the well, making subtle comments about Dad's mental state, positioning herself as his devoted caregiver while secretly robbing him blind. The family's enthusiastic support of Amanda's announcement proved how well her manipulation had worked. They genuinely believed she deserved Dad's entire estate because she had been taking such good care of him. But now it was time for the truth. "Amanda," I said, setting down my fork and looking directly at her flushed, triumphant face. "Before we celebrate your inheritance, don't you think the family should know about the $40,000 you've stolen from Dad's bank accounts over the past 18 months? The room went silent except for the sound of Aunt Martha's wineglass hitting the floor. Amanda's face transformed in an instant. The warm, grateful daughter expression vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating I had never seen before. But instead of the defensive panic I expected, she started laughing. Not nervous laughter, but a confident, almost predatory sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Denver," she said, shaking her head as if I were a confused child. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. This is exactly why Dad and I decided not to tell you about his condition until after the holidays." She stood up and walked behind Dad's chair, placing her hands protectively on his shoulders. "Everyone, I'm sorry you have to hear this, but Denver has been feeding Dad paranoid delusions about family members stealing from him. It's one of the classic signs of early-stage dementia. The accusations against loved ones, the confusion about money, the inability to remember financial transactions." My Uncle Robert leaned forward, concern replacing the celebration on his face. "What kind of accusations, Amanda?" "Denver convinced Dad that someone in the family was stealing from him," Amanda continued, her voice taking on the patient tone of a long-suffering caregiver. "He helped Dad change all his passwords and bank account access, essentially isolating him from the rest of us. Then he started feeding Dad stories about mysterious withdrawals and missing money." Amanda pulled out her phone and began scrolling through text messages. "Look, I've been documenting Dad's confusion for months, trying to get him proper medical help. Here's a text from October where he called me at 2 in the morning, convinced someone had broken into his house to steal $20 from his wallet. Here's one from November where he accused the bank teller of shortchanging him, but the security footage showed he had miscounted his cash." She passed her phone around the table, and I watched family members' expressions shift from confusion to sympathy for Amanda and suspicion toward me. Each text message painted a picture of a daughter desperately trying to manage her father's declining mental health while dealing with a brother who was making things worse. "And Denver," Amanda continued, turning to face me with tears in her eyes, "I know you love Dad, but you've been making this so much harder for all of us. Do you remember Thanksgiving when you told Aunt Martha her stuffing tasted like cardboard? Or when you skipped Uncle Robert's birthday party because you said family gatherings were draining? You've been pulling away from this family for years, and now you're trying to turn Dad against us." I felt the room's energy shift completely. Suddenly, I was the problem. Amanda was weaving together real moments when I had been tired, stressed, or simply human, turning them into evidence of my supposed campaign against the family. Cousin Jake nodded slowly. "I remember that birthday thing, Uncle Robert. Denver said he had to work. But then, Sarah saw him at the grocery store that same day. And he did seem really critical at Thanksgiving," Aunt Martha added quietly. "I just thought he was having a bad day. But maybe." Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a folder I had never seen before. "I didn't want to share these with everyone, but Denver is forcing my hand." She opened the folder and began distributing what appeared to be loan agreements. Each document looked official, with letterhead and legal language. They were dated over the past 2 years and showed Dad borrowing various amounts from Amanda for household expenses, medical bills, and home repairs. Every document bore Dad's signature and acknowledged that these were loans, not gifts. Dad has borrowed almost $38,000 from Bradley and me over the past 2 years, Amanda said, her voice breaking slightly. We never expected him to pay it back because he's family, but he insisted on signing these agreements because his pride wouldn't let him accept charity. Uncle Robert examined one of the documents closely. This looks legitimate, Amanda. The signature matches what I remember of your father's handwriting. Of course it's legitimate, Amanda replied. But Dad's short-term memory issues mean he doesn't remember asking for these loans. Denver has convinced him that money he borrowed from us was actually stolen. It's heartbreaking to watch your father look at you with suspicion and fear, because his own illness is turning him against his family. I felt like I was watching a masterclass in manipulation. Every piece of evidence Dad and I had gathered was being recontextualized through Amanda's narrative of dementia and family dysfunction. The missing money became legitimate loans. The bank withdrawals became confused elderly behavior. My concern for Dad became evidence of my own psychological problems. This is why Dad decided to leave everything to Amanda. Bradley spoke up for the first time all evening. He knows she's the only one who's been taking care of him through this difficult transition. He knows Denver's paranoia and accusations are symptoms of stress, not reality. The family began nodding in agreement. Amanda had systematically prepared them for this moment over months of careful manipulation. Every seed of doubt she had planted about Dad's mental state, every criticism she had made about my relationship with the family, every piece of false evidence she had created was now blooming into a perfect defense against the truth. Dad sat silently through all of this, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. I could see the fear in his eyes, the terror that his family would choose Amanda's version of reality over his lived experience. He looked like a man who was drowning, while people on the shore debated whether he was really in the water. Dad, I said gently, trying to break through his paralysis. Tell them what you told me. Tell them about the private investigator, about the photographs, about the police report. Amanda immediately jumped in before Dad could respond. Denver, please stop. Can't you see how much you're upsetting him? This is exactly what Dr. Peterson warned us about. Confronting dementia patients with their delusions only makes them more agitated and confused. Dr. Peterson? I asked. When did Dad start seeing Dr. Peterson? 3 months ago, Amanda replied smoothly. When Dad's confusion started getting worse. Dr. Peterson specializes in geriatric psychiatry and early-stage dementia. He's the one who recommended that we avoid arguing with Dad about his financial paranoia and instead redirect his attention to positive activities. I realized with growing horror that Amanda had thought of everything. She had created a medical narrative, complete with a fictional doctor, to explain away any testimony Dad might give about her crimes. If Dad tried to tell his story, Amanda would dismiss it as dementia-related delusions confirmed by his psychiatrist. But just as Amanda seemed to have completely controlled the narrative, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my first surge of hope all evening. Amanda, I said, standing up with a calm smile. You should probably check your phone too. I think you're about to get some very interesting news. Amanda's confident expression flickered for just a moment as she reached for her phone. That tiny crack in her composure was all I needed to know that our plan was working exactly as intended. The text message on my phone was from Detective Sarah Walsh of the Denver Police Department Economic Crimes Unit. It read simply, "We have everything. Amanda Hartley and Bradley Sullivan are being arrested tonight. Warrant signed. We're en route." What the family didn't know was that Dad hadn't just hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago. He had gone straight to the police when the theft amounts reached felony levels. And I had been working closely with Detective Walsh as she built an airtight case against Amanda and Bradley. You see, everyone, I said, setting my phone down on the table where they could all see the detective's message. There are a few things Amanda hasn't told you about her relationship with Dad's finances. Amanda's phone was buzzing now too, but she was staring at mine with growing alarm. Denver, what is this? What have you done? I haven't done anything, Amanda. But the Denver Police Department Economic Crimes Unit has been very busy investigating your activities. Detective Walsh has been building a case against you for 3 weeks now. I turned to address the family directly. The private investigator Dad hired didn't just find evidence of theft from his personal accounts. The investigation uncovered that Amanda has been running a sophisticated elder fraud scheme against multiple victims, using her position as Dad's part-time bookkeeper to hide payments to fake vendors. Bradley had gone completely pale, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool December evening. The police investigation revealed that Amanda created several fake companies over the past 2 years, I continued. Green Valley Electrical Supply, Mountain View Construction Materials, Front Range Safety Equipment. All of these companies existed only on paper, but Amanda was billing Dad's business for thousands of dollars in supplies that never existed. The payments went directly into bank accounts she and Bradley controlled. Uncle Robert was still holding one of Amanda's loan documents, but now he was examining it with much more suspicion. These papers. Amanda. Are they real? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a magnifying glass I had borrowed from Dad's tool drawer. Robert, take a closer look at that signature. Look at the pen pressure. The way the letters are formed. Notice anything unusual? Uncle Robert held the document under the magnifying glass, and his expression changed completely. This signature is wrong. The D in Dad's name is formed differently than I've ever seen him write it, and the pen pressure is too light, like someone was being very careful to trace the letters rather than writing naturally. That's because Amanda forged every one of those documents, I said. During my paramedic training, we learned about signature analysis for legal documentation. I became suspicious of these papers the moment Amanda produced them because Dad's real signature has specific characteristics that come from 30 years of signing electrical permits and work orders. These forgeries miss those details. Amanda was frantically scrolling through her phone now, and whatever she was reading was making her face go from pale to green. The police investigation also uncovered that Amanda and Bradley have been laundering Dad's stolen money through their joint renovation business, I continued. They would take Dad's money to pay for materials on one job, then bill other customers for the same materials on different jobs. It allowed them to double their profit margins while making the stolen money appear to be legitimate business income. Cousin Jake was leaning forward now, his earlier support for Amanda completely evaporated. Are you saying they were running a money laundering operation? That's exactly what I'm saying, but it gets worse. The investigation also revealed that Amanda has been skimming money from Dad's business accounts by creating fraudulent vendor payments. She would submit fake invoices for electrical supplies, safety equipment, even office supplies that never existed. Dad trusted her completely with the bookkeeping, so he never questioned the expenses. I pulled out my own phone and showed the family a series of photographs Detective Walsh had shared with me. These are security camera images from various ATMs around Denver, showing Amanda making withdrawals from Dad's accounts using a duplicate debit card. The timestamps on these photos correspond exactly with times when Amanda told family members she was at Emma's soccer games, at work meetings, or running errands for Dad. The evidence was overwhelming, and I could see family members beginning to remember inconsistencies they had noticed, but dismissed over the past year. Wait, Aunt Martha said slowly. Amanda, didn't you tell me last month that your business was struggling and you couldn't afford Emma's winter coat? But then the next week, Emma had that expensive new jacket from North Face. And you said you couldn't contribute to the family gift for Dad's birthday because money was tight, Uncle Robert added. But then you and Bradley bought that new pickup truck in November. Amanda's carefully constructed facade was crumbling as family members began connecting dots they had previously ignored. The inconsistencies in her stories, the unexplained purchases, the times when her explanations didn't match her circumstances. But I wasn't finished revealing the scope of her crimes. Dad also helped the police install security cameras in his home office after the first few suspicious incidents, I said. Those cameras captured Amanda searching through Dad's personal papers, photographing documents with her phone, and even practicing Dad's signature on scrap paper. I showed them video footage on my phone from Dad's hidden cameras. The images were clear and undeniable. Amanda alone in Dad's office, going through his files, taking pictures of bank statements, and sitting at his desk with a pen, copying his signature over and over again until she could replicate it convincingly. That's impossible, Amanda finally spoke, her voice shaky for the first time all evening. Dad doesn't know how to set up security cameras. He can barely use his smartphone. You're right that Dad needed help with the technology, I replied. I helped him install the camera system 3 weeks ago. After we realized the scope of what you were doing to him. Every conversation you've had with Dad since then, every threat you've made, every manipulation tactic you've used, it's all been recorded. The room was completely silent now except for the sound of Bradley's heavy breathing and Amanda's phone continuing to buzz with what I assumed were messages from Detective Walsh or her colleagues. There's one more thing the family should hear, I said, reaching for my phone again. Dad, with the help of Detective Walsh, recorded his last conversation with Amanda when she came over to discuss the will changes. The recording captures Amanda threatening Dad with nursing home placement if he reported her theft. As I prepared to play the audio recording, Amanda suddenly lunged across the table, trying to grab my phone while screaming, "Stop it! Those recordings are illegal. You can't use them." Her desperate attempt to silence the evidence sent wine glasses flying and food scattering across the table. But Uncle Robert and Cousin Jake quickly restrained her before she could reach my phone. That's when we all heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens growing louder as they approached our house. The Christmas dinner table erupted into complete chaos as Amanda thrashed against Uncle Robert and Cousin Jake's restraining arms, screaming that the recordings were fabricated and demanding they release her immediately. Wine stained the white tablecloth, smashed plates scattered across the hardwood floor, and the carefully prepared holiday meal lay ruined amid the wreckage of our family's most devastating revelation. Through the chaos, Bradley suddenly stood up and shouted, "Enough! Just stop, Amanda! I can't do this anymore!" Everyone froze, including Amanda, who stared at her husband in shock. Bradley's face was drained of all color, and his hands shook as he gripped the back of his chair for support. "I've been sick with guilt for months," Bradley continued, his voice breaking. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look at Emma without feeling like the worst father in the world. Amanda, they know about the gambling debts. They know about the credit cards. They know about everything." Amanda's struggles against her restraint stopped completely. "Bradley, shut up. Just shut up right now." But Bradley was beyond stopping. The weight of carrying these secrets had clearly been destroying him, and seeing the evidence mount against his wife had broken his resolve completely. "We used your dad's stolen money to pay off my gambling debts from the casino trips," Bradley confessed to the horrified family. $15,000 I lost playing poker and blackjack over 6 months. Amanda said we could borrow from her dad temporarily, that he would never notice, that we'd pay it back before anyone found out. He turned to Dad with tears streaming down his face. But then Amanda kept taking more money, saying we needed it for business expenses, for Emma's school, for the house payment. She opened a credit card in your name and maxed it out buying inventory for our construction jobs. We used your credit to secure contracts, then used your money to pay for materials while billing other customers for the same supplies. The scale of the fraud was even worse than I had realized. This wasn't just theft. It was identity theft, credit fraud, and a complex scheme that had been growing more elaborate and criminal over time. "Amanda convinced me that you were just going to leave the money to some charity anyway," Bradley continued. "She said you had more money than you could ever spend, that you were being selfish by hoarding it instead of helping your family. But when you started asking questions about the missing money, Amanda panicked. Aunt Martha was clutching Uncle Robert's arm, both of them staring at Amanda as if they had never seen her before. Amanda, is this true? Did you really steal from your own father?" With her husband confessing and the police sirens growing louder, Amanda's mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, caring daughter persona vanished, replaced by raw fury and desperation. "Fine," she screamed. "Yes, I took the money. But it was my money. I'm his daughter. I'm the one who's been taking care of him for years, while Denver ignored his family responsibilities. I'm the one who helped him with his business, who brought Emma over for visits, who made sure he wasn't lonely after Mom died." The selfish entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence against her, Amanda still believed she was the victim in this situation. "That money was just sitting in his accounts doing nothing," Amanda continued. "Dad lives like a miser, refusing to spend anything on himself, refusing to enjoy his retirement. I was putting that money to good use, investing it in our business, using it to provide for Emma's future. At least I was making something productive happen with it instead of letting it rot in some savings account. Dad finally found his voice, standing up despite his trembling legs. Amanda, I trusted you with everything. I trusted you with my business, with my finances, with my future. You weren't just stealing money from me. You were stealing my security, my independence, my ability to take care of myself in my old age. Oh, spare me the drama, Amanda shot back. You have more money than you know what to do with. You could live comfortably for 20 years on what you have left. I took what I needed, nothing more. You took $40,000, I interjected. That represents 2 years of Dad's living expenses. You were stealing his future, Amanda. I was securing my future. Amanda screamed. My daughter's future. Bradley's business was failing. Emma needed private school tuition. We were about to lose our house. I did what any mother would do to protect her family. The twisted logic of her justification was stunning. In Amanda's mind, her financial problems gave her the right to steal from her elderly father. She had convinced herself that need justified theft, that family relationships granted her ownership of Dad's life savings. But Uncle Robert was shaking his head in disgust. Amanda, your father worked for 30 years to save that money. He earned every dollar through physical labor that left him with arthritis and chronic back pain. What gave you the right to decide how his money should be spent? I gave her that right, Amanda replied with breathtaking arrogance. By being the daughter who actually cared about his well-being. By being the one who visited regularly, who helped with his paperwork, who made sure he wasn't isolated and forgotten. Denver shows up for Christmas and Easter and thinks he knows what Dad needs. As Amanda ranted, I realized the police sirens had stopped. Detective Walsh and her officers had arrived and were probably approaching the house right now. But Amanda wasn't finished destroying whatever remained of her relationship with the family. And you want to know the truth about Dad's precious money? He was planning to leave most of it to some veteran's charity instead of his own grandchildren. His own flesh and blood was going to inherit nothing while strangers got rich off his savings. I stopped that from happening. I made sure the money stayed in the family where it belonged. This revelation hit Dad like a physical blow. How did you know about my charitable intentions? Those conversations were with my lawyer. They were confidential. Amanda's laugh was bitter and triumphant. I've been reading your mail for 2 years, Dad. Every letter from your lawyer, every bank statement, every financial document that came to your house. I needed to know what you were planning so I could protect my daughter's inheritance. The scope of Amanda's violation of Dad's privacy was staggering. She had been systematically invading his personal life, reading his private correspondence, and using that information to manipulate his finances and his family relationships. That's when we heard the firm knock on the front door, and Detective Walsh's authoritative voice, Denver Police. We have a warrant for the arrest of Amanda Hartley and Bradley Sullivan. Amanda's defiance crumbled instantly as the reality of her situation finally hit her. She looked around the table at family members who were staring at her with disgust and disbelief. At her husband who had confessed to their crimes. At the ruined Christmas dinner that symbolized the destruction she had brought to our family. As I walked toward the front door to let Detective Walsh inside, Amanda called out one final desperate lie. This is all Denver's fault. He poisoned Dad against me. He made this whole thing up because he was jealous of my relationship with Dad. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. Her husband had confessed, and her own words had revealed the depth of her greed and entitlement. The woman who had stood up 20 minutes earlier to claim Dad's inheritance was about to be led away in handcuffs, and our family Christmas would be remembered forever as the night Amanda's crimes were finally exposed. Detective Walsh entered our house with 2 uniformed officers, surveying the scene of overturned wine glasses and scattered food with professional composure. She was a tall woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from years of investigating financial crimes. Amanda Hartley and Bradley Sullivan? Detective Walsh asked, though it was clear she already knew who they were. Amanda made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Officer, thank goodness you're here. My family has been threatening me all evening. They've been trying to coerce me into confessing to crimes I didn't commit. I want to file charges against them for harassment and intimidation. Detective Walsh looked at Amanda with the patient expression of someone who had heard every possible manipulation tactic. Miss, Hartley, we've been monitoring this conversation through the recording device your brother has been wearing with our full cooperation. We heard your confession regarding the theft of your father's funds, the credit card fraud, the forgery of loan documents, and the violation of your father's privacy. Amanda's face went completely white as she realized I had been wearing a wire all evening. Every word she had spoken, every admission she had made, every threat and justification had been captured by police recording equipment. The recording device was installed 3 days ago with your father's full cooperation and a valid court order, Detective Walsh continued. Tonight's dinner conversation was a planned operation to gather final evidence of your continued crimes and threats against your father. I reached into my shirt and revealed the small recording device that had been hidden beneath my sweater. Amanda, everything you said tonight about stealing Dad's money, forging documents, reading his private mail, and planning to manipulate his will has been recorded by the police. Your own words just provided the final evidence needed to prosecute you for elder fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy. Bradley collapsed back into his chair, holding his head in his hands. Amanda, you told me the police didn't have enough evidence to prosecute. You said if we just stuck to our story about the loans, they couldn't prove anything. Your wife was incorrect about our evidence, Detective Walsh said. We've been building this case for 3 weeks with the full cooperation of your father and the private investigator he hired. We have security camera footage, bank records, forged documents, victim testimony from multiple elderly clients of your construction business, and now recorded confessions from both of you. The detective pulled out her handcuffs and began reading Amanda her rights. Amanda Hartley, you're under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent. As Detective Walsh continued the Miranda warning, I learned additional details about the scope of Amanda and Bradley's crimes that went far beyond what they had done to Dad. The investigation revealed that you've been running systematic elder fraud schemes against at least 4 other elderly clients of your construction business, Detective Walsh explained to the family. You would gain access to their financial information through your business relationship, then use that information to open credit cards, make unauthorized purchases, and steal funds from their accounts. Uncle Robert was staring at Amanda in horror. 4 other victims? Amanda, what kind of person have you become? The total amount stolen from all victims exceeds $150,000, Detective Walsh continued. Your father's losses represent only about 1/4 of the total crimes we've documented. The scale of Amanda and Bradley's criminal enterprise was staggering. This wasn't just a desperate daughter stealing from her father in a moment of financial crisis. This was an organized, systematic campaign of elder abuse that had been targeting vulnerable seniors across the Denver metropolitan area. We've also discovered that you've been embezzling funds from your daughter's school PTA, Detective Walsh said, addressing Amanda directly. As treasurer of the Jefferson Elementary Parent-Teacher Association, you diverted over $8,000 in fundraising money to your personal accounts. The school had to cancel their planned playground improvements and computer lab upgrades because of the missing funds. Emma was going to discover that her own mother had stolen money intended to improve her school. The ripple effects of Amanda's greed were destroying not just our family, but her own daughter's educational community. Additionally, we found evidence that you've been systematically overcharging elderly customers for construction work, taking deposits for projects never completed, and pressuring vulnerable seniors to pay in cash to avoid taxes, Detective Walsh said to Bradley. Your construction business license will be permanently revoked, and all ongoing projects will be transferred to legitimate contractors. Bradley's business, which employed 12 people, was being shut down permanently just before Christmas. Their employees would lose their jobs because of his criminal choices, and several homeowners would be left with unfinished renovations and lost deposits. As Detective Walsh handcuffed Amanda, my sister made one final attempt to blame everyone else for her situation. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. My own family set me up and recorded me without my knowledge. That's entrapment. Recording your conversations with your family's knowledge and cooperation is not entrapment, Detective Walsh replied calmly. Entrapment would require law enforcement to encourage you to commit crimes you wouldn't otherwise commit. We simply documented crimes you were already committing. What about Emma? Aunt Martha asked quietly. What happens to their daughter while they're in jail? Detective Walsh's expression softened slightly. Child Protective Services has already arranged for Emma to stay with her aunt and uncle on Bradley's side of the family. The custody arrangement will be formalized through the courts, but she'll remain with family members who can provide a stable home environment. At least Emma would be spared the trauma of foster care, though she would have to live with the knowledge that both her parents were convicted criminals who had stolen from her own grandfather and her school community. The district attorney has already filed formal charges, Detective Walsh continued. Amanda Hartley faces up to 15 years in federal prison for elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Bradley Sullivan faces up to 12 years for money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. Both will be required to pay full restitution to all victims, which will likely take decades even after their release. As Amanda and Bradley were led away in handcuffs, Amanda turned back to our family one final time. Her face was twisted with rage and hatred as she screamed, "This isn't over! I'll appeal everything! I'll prove Denver manipulated all of you against me. You'll all regret this." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The family that had cheered her supposed inheritance 20 minutes earlier now watched in silence as she was arrested for stealing from her own father. Dad sat down heavily in his chair, looking exhausted but also relieved. "It's finally over," he said quietly. "I can finally stop being afraid of my own daughter." Detective Walsh handed Dad her business card. "Mr. Hartley, you'll need to come to the station tomorrow to give your formal statement. But the worst part is behind you now. Your daughter and son-in-law will likely accept plea bargains to avoid trial, which means you won't have to testify in open court." As the police cars drove away with Amanda and Bradley in custody, our family sat among the ruins of what was supposed to be a joyous Christmas celebration. But despite the devastation of the evening, there was also a sense of relief that the truth had finally been revealed and justice was beginning to be served. After the police cars disappeared into the winter night, our family sat in stunned silence around the destroyed Christmas dinner table. The elegant holiday meal that had taken Dad hours to prepare lay scattered and ruined, but somehow the physical mess seemed insignificant compared to the emotional wreckage Amanda had left behind. Dad collapsed back into his chair and began crying openly for the first time since Mom's funeral. These weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, exhaustion, and grief for the daughter he thought he knew. Uncle Robert immediately moved to sit beside him, placing a protective arm around his shoulders. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this alone," Uncle Robert said quietly. "If I had known what Amanda was doing to you, if any of us had known, she was so clever about it," Dad replied, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She made me doubt my own memory, my own perceptions. There were times I wondered if I really was getting confused about money, if maybe I had authorized those withdrawals and just forgotten about them." Aunt Martha knelt beside Dad's chair, taking his hands in hers. "We should have noticed the signs. We should have questioned Amanda's stories about your mental state instead of just accepting them. I felt the weight of the past 3 weeks settling on my shoulders. Carrying these secrets while watching Amanda manipulate the family had been one of the most difficult things I had ever done. As a paramedic, I was trained to help people in crisis, but I had been forced to watch my own father suffer while we gathered evidence to stop his abuser. Dad asked me not to tell anyone until the police had enough evidence to guarantee a conviction," I explained to the family. Amanda had been so careful to cover her tracks, and her manipulation of the family was so complete, that we needed overwhelming proof before we could act. Cousin Jake was still holding one of Amanda's forged loan documents, staring at it in disbelief. "How did we miss this? How did none of us realize she was capable of something like this?" "Because she's been practicing manipulation techniques for years," I replied. Detective Walsh told me that Amanda had been researching elder abuse tactics online, studying forums where people discussed how to psychologically manipulate elderly parents into giving up control of their finances. The revelation that Amanda had been following a systematic playbook for elder abuse was perhaps the most chilling aspect of her crimes. This wasn't desperate improvisation. It was calculated, premeditated psychological warfare against our father. "She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push," Dad said. "She exploited my fear of becoming a burden on the family, my worry about losing my independence, my guilt about not being able to provide more financial help to my children over the years." Uncle Robert shook his head in disgust. "And she used Emma as leverage too. Every time she brought Emma over for visits, she was really conducting surveillance, gathering information about your routines and your finances. As we talked, family members began sharing memories of Amanda's manipulative behavior that they had dismissed or forgotten over the years. Aunt Martha remembered Amanda spreading rumors about cousins to prevent them from getting closer to each other. Uncle Robert recalled Amanda lying about family members' comments to create conflicts between relatives. "She told me you thought my cooking was terrible," Aunt Martha said to me. "She said you complained about having to eat my food at family gatherings. I was hurt and angry at you for months, and she told me you thought I was too cheap to give good Christmas gifts," Uncle Robert added. "She said you made fun of my presents behind my back." I started avoiding family events because I felt embarrassed and unwelcome. I realized that Amanda had been systematically poisoning relationships within our family for years, creating divisions and resentments that served her ultimate goal of isolating Dad from potential allies who might question her behavior. "The most insidious part," I said, "is that she made each of us feel like we were the problem. We all started questioning our own perceptions and wondering if maybe we really were being difficult or unreasonable." Dad nodded sadly. "She did the same thing to me with the money. When I first noticed missing funds, she made me feel foolish for being suspicious. She convinced me I was probably just forgetting transactions or miscounting deposits. The psychological damage Amanda had inflicted was in some ways worse than the financial theft. She had systematically undermined Dad's confidence in his own mental abilities, making him feel helpless and dependent just when he needed strength to protect himself. But what I can't understand," Cousin Jake said, "is how she could look Emma in the eye every day while stealing money from her grandfather and her school. How could she justify that to herself?" "Narcissists create elaborate justification systems," I replied, drawing on psychology training from my paramedic coursework. Amanda genuinely believed she was entitled to Dad's money, that her financial needs gave her the right to take whatever she wanted. She probably convinced herself she was being a good mother by securing Emma's future, even if the means were criminal. 3 days after Christmas, Amanda called our house from the county jail. She had been denied bail because the judge considered her a flight risk with multiple victims across the metro area. I answered the phone, knowing this would likely be her final attempt to manipulate the family. "Denver, you have to help me," Amanda said, her voice smaller and more desperate than I had ever heard it. "The public defender they assigned me is useless. I need a real lawyer, but all our assets have been frozen. Dad has to drop the charges and forgive the debt so I can get out of jail." "Amanda, Dad didn't just drop charges against a shoplifter," I replied calmly. "You committed felony elder fraud against your own father. You stole his security, his independence, and his trust. There's no going back from that." "But what about Emma?" Amanda pleaded. "She needs her mother. She's just a child caught in the middle of this family drama. You can't destroy a little girl's life just to punish me." Even from jail, Amanda was trying to use Emma as emotional leverage, attempting to make me feel guilty for the consequences of Amanda's own criminal choices. "Emma is safe with Bradley's sister and brother-in-law," I said. "She's in a stable home with people who won't teach her that stealing from elderly relatives is acceptable behavior." "You're destroying our family," Amanda screamed suddenly, her desperation turning to rage. "Everything that happens to Emma, everything that happens to me, it's your fault. You turned Dad against me. You manipulated the police. You orchestrated this whole thing because you were jealous of my relationship with Dad." "Amanda, I didn't steal $40,000 from Dad. I didn't forge loan documents. I didn't open credit cards in his name. I didn't threaten to have him declared incompetent when he questioned missing money. You did all of those things. The only thing I did was help him find the courage to report your crimes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Amanda spoke again, her voice now cold and filled with hatred. "I will never forgive you for this, Denver. Never. You chose Dad's money over your own sister. You chose the police over your own family. When I get out of prison, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. When you get out of prison, Amanda, I hope you'll have learned that family relationships are built on love and trust, not financial manipulation and emotional abuse. I hope you'll understand that protecting Dad from your crimes was an act of love, not betrayal. I hung up the phone and blocked Amanda's number permanently. Our family had suffered enough of her manipulation and abuse. It was time to focus on healing and rebuilding the relationships she had damaged through years of calculated deception. The woman who had stood up at Christmas dinner to claim Dad's inheritance had revealed herself to be someone none of us truly knew, and someone none of us could safely allow back into our lives. 6 months later, I found myself sitting on Dad's new patio at Sunset Springs Senior Living Community, watching him laugh with his neighbors as they planned their next photography expedition to Rocky Mountain National Park. The transformation in Dad's appearance and demeanor was nothing short of remarkable. The fearful, confused man who had been systematically abused by his own daughter had been replaced by someone who looked 10 years younger and radiated genuine contentment. "You know what the best part about this place is?" Dad asked, gesturing toward the community garden where several residents were tending their vegetable plots. "Nobody here wants my money. These people are my friends because they enjoy my company, not because they're planning to steal from me." Dad's decision to move into the senior living community had surprised our family initially, but it proved to be exactly what he needed to regain his confidence and independence. After years of Amanda making him feel like a burden who needed constant supervision, Dad discovered he thrived in an environment designed for active, independent seniors. The legal proceedings had concluded much as Detective Walsh predicted. Amanda was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for elder fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh because Amanda showed no remorse during her sentencing hearing, instead blaming her father and brother for her situation. Bradley received 6 years after accepting a plea bargain and cooperating fully with prosecutors to help recover funds for other victims. "I got a letter from Emma yesterday," Dad said, pulling out a handwritten note from his shirt pocket. "She's doing well with Bradley's sister. She made honor roll this semester and joined the school choir. She wants to come visit me next month." Emma had been the innocent victim in this entire situation, and I was relieved to hear she was adjusting well to her new living situation. Bradley's sister Karen had become Emma's legal guardian and was providing the stable, honest home environment that Emma had never really experienced with Amanda and Bradley. "Emma asked me in her letter if I was angry at her because of what her mother did," Dad continued. "I wrote back and told her that she's not responsible for her parents' choices and that I love her just as much as I always have." Dad's relationship with Emma represented one of the few positive outcomes from this devastating situation. For the first time in her young life, Emma was learning about healthy family relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation and deceit. The financial recovery process had taken several months, but Dad ultimately recovered most of the stolen funds through asset seizures and restitution orders. Amanda and Bradley's house, vehicles, and business assets were liquidated by the court, with proceeds distributed to their various victims. "The funny thing is," Dad said, "I actually have more money now than I did before Amanda started stealing from me. When the police investigated my accounts, they discovered I had been overpaying taxes for years because Amanda had been filing incorrect paperwork. The IRS refunded almost $12,000. But beyond the financial recovery, the most significant change in Dad's life was his newfound sense of security and purpose. Without Amanda's toxic influence undermining his confidence, Dad had rediscovered interests and abilities he thought he had lost to aging. "I never realized how much of my supposed confusion and memory problems were actually caused by the stress of being constantly manipulated and threatened," Dad explained. "Once Amanda was out of my life, my mind cleared up completely. I wasn't losing my memory. I was just living in a state of chronic anxiety." Dad had become an advocate for elder abuse prevention in our community, speaking at senior centers and community groups about the warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. His story had helped law enforcement identify and prosecute several other cases of elder abuse in the Denver area. "The hardest part for most victims," Dad told his audiences, "is accepting that someone they love and trust is deliberately harming them. We want to believe our children have our best interests at heart, so we make excuses for suspicious behavior instead of investigating it." Our family gatherings had resumed, but they felt completely different now. Without Amanda's presence creating tension and division, relatives who had been distant for years began rebuilding genuine relationships with each other. Uncle Robert started hosting monthly barbecues, Aunt Martha organized family game nights, and cousins who barely spoke before began planning joint vacations. Amanda's manipulation only worked because we weren't communicating openly with each other, Uncle Robert observed during our 4th of July gathering. She could tell each of us different stories because we weren't comparing notes. Now we actually talked to each other directly, instead of relying on secondhand information. The experience had taught our family valuable lessons about the importance of direct communication and the dangers of allowing one person to control information flow between family members. We established new traditions of regular family meetings and group text conversations that made it impossible for anyone to manipulate relationships through selective information sharing. Dad had also made peace with his decision to alter his estate planning. His will now divided his inheritance between me, Emma's educational trust fund, and several elder abuse prevention organizations. Amanda was permanently excluded from any inheritance, which no longer felt like punishment but simply the natural consequence of her choices. I used to feel guilty about cutting Amanda out of my will, Dad said. But then I realized that giving money to someone who has proven they'll steal from vulnerable elderly people would actually make me complicit in future crimes. The most loving thing I can do for Amanda is refuse to enable her behavior. Emma had expressed interest in studying criminal justice when she got older, inspired by her desire to help other children whose parents had committed crimes. Her resilience and determination to create something positive from her family's tragedy gave me hope for the next generation. 1 year after that devastating Christmas dinner, Dad married Carol, a retired teacher he met at the senior center. Their wedding was a joyful celebration, attended by both families and many friends from their community. Watching Dad dance with his new wife at their reception, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his happiness, I realized how much of his life Amanda had stolen beyond just money. You know what I've learned from all of this? Dad asked me as we sat together on his patio that warm spring evening. Real love doesn't manipulate, threaten, or isolate people from their support systems. Real love doesn't make you feel guilty for protecting yourself or asking questions about suspicious behavior. Dad paused to water his tomato plants, a hobby he had taken up since moving to the senior community. Real family relationships are built on honesty, respect, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. They don't require you to sacrifice your security, your independence, or your peace of mind. As I reflected on everything our family had endured and overcome, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about financial security or legal protections, although those were certainly important. The deepest lesson was about the courage required to confront painful truths about people we love, even when those truths challenge everything we thought we knew about our relationships. Sometimes protecting the people we love means being brave enough to expose painful realities that others don't want to acknowledge, I told Dad. It means being willing to be temporarily misunderstood or disliked while the truth emerges. Dad nodded thoughtfully. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive behavior, even if they interpret that refusal as betrayal. 2 years after Amanda's conviction, she wrote Dad a letter from prison. Not an apology, but a final attempt to blame him for her situation and demand financial support for her commissary account. Dad read the letter once, shook his head sadly, and threw it away without responding. Amanda is still the same person she was before prison, Dad observed. She still believes the world owes her something, that her problems are always someone else's fault. Until she takes responsibility for her choices and their consequences, there's no possibility of reconciliation. Our family now celebrates holidays with gratitude for what we learned about genuine relationships, honest communication, and the difference between love and manipulation. Dad often says he's grateful the truth came out when it did, giving him the opportunity to rebuild his life based on authenticity instead of fear. Emma visits Dad and Carol regularly, and their relationship has become a model of what healthy family love looks like. She calls him Grandpa, brings him her report cards, asks his advice about school and friendships, and trusts him completely because he has never lied to her or tried to manipulate her emotions for personal gain. As I finish telling this story, I want to leave you with the question that changed my family forever. Have you noticed family members isolating elderly relatives from outside perspectives, making them doubt their own memories, or gradually taking control of their financial decisions? These behaviors aren't love or caregiving. They're warning signs of potential abuse that deserve immediate investigation and professional intervention. If this story resonated with you, or reminded you of situations in your own family, please share it with others who might benefit from recognizing these warning signs. Your like, subscription, and comments help spread awareness about elder abuse, which affects millions of families across the United States. Thank you for listening to our family's difficult but ultimately hopeful journey from betrayal to healing. The most important thing I learned is that confronting family abuse and manipulation is never easy. But the alternative, allowing vulnerable people to suffer in silence, is far worse. Sometimes protecting the people we love means having the courage to expose painful truths that others would prefer to ignore. Our family survived this crisis because we chose truth over comfort, justice over false peace, and genuine love over manipulative control.